All right. Then my time begins now. Resolved. You should accept the highest paying job you are offered and then donate your discretionary income to charity. As the affirmation, I'm going to be defining the type of round this is. This is going to be a fact round. So this is going to be based off of preponderance and evidence, and logic and reasoning is particularly going to be key in this round today. So for some definitions, so the definition of discretionary income is income remaining after the deduction of taxes, other mandatory charges, and expenditure on necessary items. We're going to be sort of giving you an average definition of discretionary income from a young graduate of a prestigious US university in a second. Okay, now moving into the framing. So first of all, the affirmation is arguing as one person in this scenario. The affirmation is trying to donate money to charity. Therefore, the affirmation is trying to be a good person. In order to maximize the effectiveness of this charitable giving, this person uses the internet to find the best charities to donate to. We think that's a fairly self-explanatory burden for this affirmation person to be held under. Additionally, I'd like to give some statistics that show how discretionary income is going to be working. An average graduate coming out of the Ivy League earns $50,000 to $70,000 a year right out of college. Account for the resolution stating that it's going to be the highest paid job. A fresh graduate in this resolution is looking to make over $90K a year, with each year increasing substantially. Additionally, 40% of Ivy League students go into the financial sector because they're heavily recruited by Goldman Sachs, McKinley, and other large companies. The average Goldman Sachs employee makes $367,000 on an annual basis, according to the firm's most recent financial disclosures, according to Investopedia. And we can also see that the average cost of living in SF is $60,000 a year. So mathematically, if you did all of this math, you'd end up with roughly $300,000 to donate to charity if you were working at Goldman Sachs, which is the most high-paying jobs that will be offered to Ivy League and prestigious students across the nation. So at the peak of donation, it'll be about $300K, and it'll start at roughly around $10,000 to $20,000, and will increase up to $300K over the course of several decades. Is that enough of a clarity on the discretionary income for everyone? All right, seeing no questions, I'm going to move into my first advantage. That's that charity is the most effective. We can see that according to Harvard University, the best charities have a few factors that you will find as a good person trying to donate money. The factors that our good person who's trying to donate money is going to consider is: one, this charity should tackle a large scale cause that puts a large burden on people. Two, this charity should be neglected, as in this charity doesn't get a lot of money already. And three, this charity should have a specific solution to implement. I'm going to give you an example of a charity that fits this criterion. It's called Against Malaria Foundation, which used long-lasting insecticide-treated bed nets, or LLINS, to significantly reduce child mortality due to malaria. Donating 50K a year to this foundation is far more effective than being a doctor yourself in the middle, trying to fight malaria, because your donation of 50K a year for the next 30, 40 years will end up producing a huge amount of these nets and a huge amount of this technology, which will ultimately severely decrease child mortality, versus being one doctor in one hospital, likely in the United States, but even if it was in a country that's being afflicted by malaria, there's a really low chance that you're going to have any real solvency to actually create any real change. Additionally, we can see that there's other foundations we'd like to highlight. The Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria raised $13 billion and saved 8 million lives over the next 3 years. If you're somebody who's working at this top of the line job and is able to donate 300K to charity every single year, you're going to be able to raise a huge amount of money. We can see that money is directly correlated to saving millions of lives. So meaning this is going to be a much larger impact than you could have as any other job in the status quo. There's many types of charities as well. If this person has interests in for example, if this person has interest in psychology, they could donate to a crisis text line, which would give them free count, which which basically hires people to give free counseling. And since that money is directly going to be going towards paying psychologists and psychiatrists, it's ultimately going to be going towards a good cause. If they're interested in malnutrition, they can donate to the World Central Kitchen, which gives meals during COVID-19 by working with restaurants to sell, to give their extra food, leftovers, for free towards people who don't have access to it. If they're interested in heart diseases, they could give to Heart International, which is shipping medical supplies and has created a new special kit for COVID-19 relief. All of these are some of the top charities you can Google online. And so since we're assuming this person is a good person who wants to make the world a better place, they're definitely going to use the internet to Google and find these charities, and therefore pick the one that fits these standards the best. We can also see probability will flow towards the affirmation in this round, because the chance that one person from a top school would be the person to cure cancer or start a life-saving like a life-saving technology is incredibly small, but the chance that somebody will look into good charity to donate into is a very high chance. So we should be going on that probability that like we're not talking about the one person out of like a million who's going to cure cancer. We're talking about like a student who likely is not going to be that one person. Additionally, we can say charities also employ a lot of people. According to a 2019 report by the Center for Civil Society Studies at Johns Hopkins University, nonprofits account for roughly 1 in 10 jobs in the US private force, with total employees numbering 12.3 million in 2016. So obviously, like the payment of this creates more jobs for more people, additionally to just yourself. So if you were to take a different job, you'd be denying other people jobs, which would obviously create like a net harm towards the entirety of society. Okay, now moving into like the second argument here, which is that others will take the job. So again, prefacing this resolution is only to one young graduate, and therefore it would not expand to other graduates. If that one graduate refuses to take the job at Goldman Sachs, then someone else will do it, because Harvard, Ivy League students, Stanford students are so highly like recruited from like these into these institutions. Ultimately, this means another individual will take the high-paying job, but they probably won't be donating nearly the amount of money that this graduate does, because this graduate is bound by the affirmations like plan here to actually be able to donate to money. This means that going with the negation would mean that there'd be some, I'll come back to the end of this argument. This means that you going with the negation would mean that you'd be basically giving the same amount of money to a different person who wouldn't be donating to charity, and it would create a net difference of nothing. It would ultimately mean that like this one person goes into a different industry, but obviously if we're going like by the probability and the way real world probabilities work, this one person isn't going to solve all the problems that like is given anyways. Yes, I'll take your POI now. Are you muted?
Sorry, I'm so sorry. So are you saying that these graduate students should be donating their discretionary income to charity for the rest of their lives, or only for that job that they have coming out of college?
We will be saying that they'll be donating their discretionary income as long as they have that high-paying job that we described to you in the framing. So as long as they're making that money, they should be able to donate discretionary income, which is like income that they have on top that they're not even using for like themselves and their basic needs. So we can see that ultimately, like the summary of this is there's several reasons to be preferring the affirmative. We're going to be like donating to more charities. We're going to be donating to the right charities because we're assuming the affirmative is backing a good person, and we're ultimately going to be solving for things like malaria, things like tuberculosis, things like cancer, things like the mental health problems within the United States. And we're also like going to be the only unique side that's able to actually take that job and donate the money, because the negation is going to be arguing the opposite. For these reasons, I urge an affirmation vote. Thank you.
Okay. So, hello, I'm Cheryl. I'll be the first speaker for the negation. The order of my speech is going to be an overview, and then 2 off-case positions, and then case.
Is overview flowed on aft of case, or do you want it on a new sheet?
Sorry, what?
Is overview, should I put overview on the aft top of case, or is it long enough to warrant its own sheet?
I think you can put it on our first off-case position. So okay. Our first disadvantage. Okay. Overview on the round is, while we as a negation support the sentiment of donating a lot of income to charity, we do not believe all of your discretionary income should be spent there. To be clear, we would support this graduate spending even 70 or 80% of their income on charity if they wanted, but just not 100%. And we also don't support the idea that you should always take the highest paying job. Also, some clarifications on the observations on the definitions is they say you as a singular person, but saying one person is not a good standard. Rather, we should be looking at Ivy League graduates in general, because of the fact that like we don't know who this person is, and they can just make up a bunch of new qualities of this person in the block, and we have no way to respond. Also, they assume that this person is just like such a great person, is going to donate to the best charities. That's also an unfair assumption and a specification that shouldn't be made, because that ruins the entire point of this debate and debating like in general. Because if we're like, there's no point of just debating about one person. That's useless, right? That has no impact. Let's go on to our first contention, which is innovation. The uniqueness of what's happening right now, the last 30 years has seen an increasing rate of spin-offs from university research, and an increasing fraction of academics are engaging in entrepreneurial activities. The dramatic increase in the rate of university spin-offs for the last decades is attributed to several reasons. The germination of biomedical research in the 1970s and the passage of the Baugh-Doyle Act in 1980, which increased financing of research by industry, changes in industry guidelines and behavior, and changes in the scientific ethos of faculty and researchers. Essentially, what a spin-off is after the research you do in university, you take that research and you try to make innovation with it, right? And the percentage of university alumni who start businesses are approximately 24% at MIT, Stanford Business School, and a very prestigious one in China. Between 12 to 36% form an engineering program in Halsand University in Sweden, and 42% from Chalmers University in Sweden. 13% of alumni at Harvard Business School start successful businesses within a year of graduation. Judging by these case studies, we cannot ignore the impact of research that research has on university students. Obviously, these students all want to start their startups and make a name for themselves. But the links first is that they stop innovation. Doing research is not nearly as profitable as working for a big company right away, because research and innovation takes decades to make a difference. Working at Google would be higher paying than searching for cures to cancer, for example. But the app would have everyone work for big corporations or high-paying jobs, never innovating or creating startups. Creating a startup at the first time you make it, it's super unprofitable. And if they encourage that you just take the highest paying job, there's going to be virtually no startups in these Ivy League students, which is really bad because these people are the people who are have the most R&D funding at their schools. But also, yeah, so this would be very detrimental. And it's not only for medical research and stuff, it's also about tech research, tech companies, or working for small businesses, which also do not provide as many benefits. But also you can look to the example of the Chinese government, where 1 in 5 corporations say that China has stolen their IP within the last year, and how Xi Jinping literally said the lack of innovation is an Achilles heel for the Chinese economy. This goes back to a lot of the mindset that happens in China, that you have to make as much profit right away and immediately. This is bad. The internal links is, first is this stops research. Once again, I already explained this, but second is the economy. One study of 15 leading economies showed that for every $1 investment in R&D, it generates $20 to the economic activity. And also estimates of social returns in R&D for the advanced countries are above 40%. And however, this is for OECD companies, but simple out-of-sample predictions for low-income countries suggest that their returns for R&D would reach well into the triple digits. Yet poor countries invest far less in innovation than rich countries, not only in R&D, but basically in every type. Okay, and the third is medical research. Research is how we created the COVID vaccine. Obviously, this is very not profitable. Vaccines take decades to expand, and they need to be approved and go through a very long process, meaning it's a very risky proposition for pharmaceutical manufacturers. So you have to have you have to be a good person to be involved in research. In Massachusetts, the Moderna vaccine took 1 weekend. It was complete before China had even acknowledged that the disease had been transmitted from human to human, more than a week before the first confirmed coronavirus case in the United States, showing that even though we never used the pits for a Moderna vaccine, we were already doing research because people care about health and safety. And that's why other countries are using United States development. And also this medical scientific research expands to every field. Over 70% of processed foods purchased in the supermarket contains ingredients improved through biotechnology. The impacts are innovation. This outweighs all of their impacts, because innovation, every time we see an industrial revolution, the quality of life, things get cheaper, people's lives get easier, less people die. The second contention is working hard. The uniqueness is, first, knowing that you never benefit from your money discourages you from working hard. According to USA studies, in countries where workers were not rewarded for the work they did, for example, communist countries in the Soviet Union, people were not reported less. They reported less life satisfaction, but workers were also less productive and motivated. You can compare this to communism, because if you're not able to buy a BMW or anything like that, even though you're earning so much money, that's basically communism. And also countries with lower worker productivity also have smaller economies proportional to the population. Second is motivated employees can increase profits by 50%. Engaged companies grow profits as much as 3 times faster than their competitors. You need motivated employees, and not you can't assume that every Ivy League student is super altruistic and just is living for other people. They probably want to make money, right? And also third is according to the consumerism commentary, 74.4% of millennials cite money, being well off, and making profit as an essential life goal. The links, one plan removes the profit and money-making incentive, which is a primary goal for people. If everyone always donated to charity, the motivation to make money would decline, meaning there wouldn't actually be an increase in the amount of money people can spend on charity. Second is the worker productivity and motivation is critical to making sure the economy at large is strong. If the economy sinks due to a lack of worker interest, then the country starts struggling more financially, businesses can't survive, and ultimately unemployment, poverty, and all these harms will only increase. You can look to communist countries, which like the whole idea of that is to help the working class and people who are earning less, but overall the quality of life is just really terrible. But the impacts is worker morale, quality of life, and life satisfaction. But secondly is the economy. The economy, every time the economy goes up, the per capita income goes up, and everyone's quality of life is better. So if we have a bad economy and workers who literally do not care about earning money, then there's no more productivity. Let's go into their contentions. They give the example of the financial sector. However, like, you know, the stereotype about people on Wall Street and like finance bros, right? They love money, and that's because a lot of the times these investments aren't necessarily helping anybody. It's like all these hedge funds really aren't helping the overall world. So it shows that these people, like, they'll have no motivation to make any money and probably will find some loophole to find these charities. Also, sorry, they said this is a fact round, but we should still treat it like a policy round, meaning weighing on net benefits, because like in order to determine whether something is a fact, we have to determine whether it's true. On their charity, charity can actually be very bad for developing countries. For example, after Hurricane Katrina, millions of old t-shirts were donated to Haiti to aid those who lost their possessions. However, even though they receive a bunch of t-shirts, it takes demand away from making and selling clothes by local people. This reduces opportunity for jobs and therefore does nothing to improve the lives of people in the future. Also, statistics show that up to, like, for example, in Chicago, up to 50% of donations were for fundraising costs. So a lot of this money doesn't even do anything. It's better that we innovate something like a COVID vaccine, which can save millions of lives. But also they talk about charity. There's no link because most Americans, once again, do not care. But also they talk about, like, they list these charity organizations, but you can't specify the charity. The topic never says to the best charities, meaning these people can still donate to whatever charities they want. Also, they talk about how these nonprofits employ a lot of people. That's non-unique. If they already employ 1 in 10 jobs, then there's no need to contribute more. They also talk about how we're giving the same amount. Okay, also, this entire idea has no solvency, because sure, you can accept the highest paying job once you're out of university, but once you realize that you're earning less than people who aren't from the Ivy League, you're probably going to be like, nah, like, I'm gonna choose a different job or start a startup and stop donating to charity. Also, you can turn all of their impacts. It's probably gonna discourage people from donating to charity in the rest of their life, because it's gonna create a negative perception of charity, just like people sucking up your money, which is not what charity should be about. And yeah, like, they don't specify what charities, meaning it can go to missionaries, etc. Like, it's super subjective, so not everyone's going to donate to charities that they care about.
Okay, is this a good volume for everyone? Okay, perfect. So order's going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be down what the LOC was, so kind of that little overview, and then the 2 disads, and then AFCASE all in order. Okay. If everyone's ready, then my time begins now. There's a couple things we need to talk about, especially in the very top of case. Our opponents argue that this is specific to everybody because of the fact that for some reason the resolution is able to entail this. But read the resolution. It specifically says, assume that you are a young graduate of a prestigious university. You should accept the highest paying job. And it is completely to you. And so the only individuals that potentially could even have like legitimate talk or like a conversation about this are the individuals that are within this round. So let's just talk about like here. And so because of this is protected time, and so because of the fact that we're limited to this specific round, we're trying to look at it from a 1-person standard, because of the fact that we cannot account for every single person, and also our opponent's assumption that like every single person would be taking on like the affirmative, I guess, plan, because they kind of state this as a policy, is like fundamentally impossible. Not every single person that graduates out of the Ivy League would do this, and so it's impossible for that to happen, meaning you should be going by our standard just from a probability standpoint. So from on to innovation, at the very top, they essentially argue that these specific individuals are able to create these companies, and so they're super flourishing. There's a couple things, once again, it relates to the resolution. Let's look at the resolution. The resolution specifically entails you accept the highest paying job you are offered. It explicitly states offered. Meaning if these individuals are so passionate about their businesses, which specifically after these people come out of Harvard, just the ability for them to pay for Harvard, like a lot of these massive institutions, is actually like very hard. Like currently I'm looking at an $80,000 like financial package. And so for them to have the ability to pay for that means that they most likely either have like a parent or somebody else is giving them money, meaning that they have the ability to invest in their own businesses. Yes?
Okay, so if you're taking the literal definition of you as in us, then wouldn't we all be debating a different round because we're all thinking about ourselves? Like, doesn't that like if you're really going to make it that literal?
Well, it's specifically if we're accepting this, like adopting this mindset, like these 7 people or these 7 individuals who are adopting this mindset, that also means that like we're assuming like we'd be spreading this ideology coming out of this round. The purpose of debate is to like learn more education, but just in general is because of you, like a specific, that it means one individual. There's no pluralities to this. We're not putting this to many people, which is essentially, even if it's somebody who's outside of this round, it's still one singular individual. Unfortunately, that is how the framing of the round is, and that is what we're prepared for, because that is how the resolution is worded. Under framers' intent, you should be going under this, but also in general, like you don't necessarily lose any ground here. But I'll go more into the innovation argument here. Essentially, these individuals would probably be taking on their own business, meaning they wouldn't have this like countering like high-paying job that they're talking about, and it also weeds out people who specifically go into businesses just because there's like potentially thinking about it. We're really looking for the individuals who are passionate enough to essentially take their business to the next level and not looking to work at like Saks and things like that. But just in general, for these individuals to have the ability to afford an Ivy League college in the first place probably indicates to you that they have another point of like income from their parents or something like that, though it doesn't fall under discretionary income because it isn't necessarily income from a legal status. And so then they tell you like China is specifically a problem here because of the fact that China has like a lack of innovation due to the fact that like they've been able to, because of like the Ivy League and kind of the whole situation. Firstly is because of the fact that this isn't necessarily happening in like the status quo. You probably can't like compare these two worlds versus like aff versus neg. But secondly, just in general, we can see China is falling behind in innovation because of the fact that they're mass producers and they typically are able to like mass produce a lot of these things. And China made that move, but also just in general, based off of China's history, specifically going through like the whole communist regime and things like that, we can see that's kind of why the reason why China is having to take our innovation, and specifically America kind of came out of the Industrial Revolution many years ago, and we're able to have that progressive steps there, and we have the infrastructure in order to do so. But just in general, we can see a lot of the innovation that our opponents really want to interact in this round are really coming from big companies. I'll get more into this on their kind of medical research argument. Essentially, they tell you that like medical research is super important, but we specifically can see the Pfizer, Moderna, or even Johnson & Johnson are all coming from big companies. And the reason why is because big companies are able to create a united front. You're able to work with other individuals, and specifically, you're able to apply the cost of courts and patents. And specifically, is that these are big companies that are paying a lot specifically to people who are coming out of the Ivy League. Obviously, they're going to get the better end of the stick when it comes down to entering these companies because they just have a better stacked resume, meaning these are going to be high-paying jobs. So ultimately, what we can see is these are the individuals that are like most likely going to be the ones that actually are innovating. And so when these are the individuals entering this field within the affirmative world, it indicates to you that innovation actually ends up flowing onto our side versus having a small business, someone like starting their own business off of like a whim. We can see that that's probably going to indicate to you most likely one, won't be successful, but two, won't make a massive vaccine the way that Pfizer, Moderna, or even Johnson & Johnson were able to. On the second argument about working hard, essentially they tell you here that these individuals are not going to work hard because of the fact that they have to donate all of their like discretionary income to these like these things. Then they give you the example of like a BMW, but like a BMW fundamentally is a car. If a car is necessary for that individual to attend like their work, which that indicates to you that it falls within discretionary income. And so a lot of these like small luxuries in life and these small upgrades in life, these individuals will probably still have access to them within our plan or like within our definition because these are still fundamental things that they need to. And just in general, they tell you that worker morale is going to go down because these individuals have no more interest, but specifically when they know that they're also able to allot, for example, if they have like a parent or a friend who has recently gone through some certain thing and they really feel passionate about this issue, to them, it's going to bring them joy to be able to donate to a cause or a charity that really is helping with that issue. And specifically when like these charities, there's so many charities across the entire world that are able to do so many good things that are watching from so many different topics. A lot of us most likely will like make a friend or know an individual that would actually be like going through something that they would need that charity resource for, meaning they're able to still derive happiness from that. And just in general, knowing that your money is legitimately like doing some form of good versus like spending it on something that you're not too sure about probably indicates to you that it's like still something that's inherently good for someone's like mental morale. Then moving on, case. At the very top, they tell you this issue of like we should probably be valuing it on net benefits. Sure, you can go for it. Just keep in mind you do want to keep preponderance of evidence and logic in mind with that too. Then on the framing, essentially just like cross-pilot analysis, I tell you here, they tell you that like this individual, you cannot assume that this individual is going to be like an amazing individual, but we're kind of being logical here in the sense where like if this is somebody that graduated from an Ivy League college, there are chances that they wouldn't have access to like a computer and be able to research the whatever charity they want to donate to is very slim to none. They most likely would be able to do it considering we're able to do it during preparation. There are literally websites to break down how much money goes to where, meaning these individuals are most likely going to try to make the most out of their money, especially when they're donating so much of their income. They want to stretch that money as far as possible. So it ultimately indicates to you that this individual is most likely going to be someone that like is going to donate their money to something that is actually like of relative goodness because they're able to do that research on their own. Then moving on to this first argument about how charity is the most effective, they essentially just tell you they're going to find a loophole around this. They don't name the loophole, don't buy this analysis. It's really hard. They're just saying there's a potential of a loophole. They don't give it to you. Then they tell you that like Hurricane Katrina and they just sold shirts, and so there's like this impact. Firstly, it was like from a short-term aspect, it still was able to resolve a lot of things, but secondly, its research in of itself is able to resolve. When we tell you specifically, these individuals are going to do their research, they're going to figure out like what exactly these charities are doing, because there are definitely some questionable charities out there. What that indicates to you is that this research is like going to negate all these issues they tell you about, and actually also on top of that is just in general, historically we've seen so much proof that like charities giving direct like items to something that isn't dispensable is actually inherently bad, which is why the charities are actually moving away from that model in the status quo, meaning accessibility to donate to such charities in the first place is even decreasing, meaning that they're probably going to go to like things like medical supplies and things are dispensable but still very, very crucial. And so then they tell you like Americans don't care. Once again, this is specifically to like one individual, especially considering like their situation here and like their background. And so when they tell you on the jobs, it's like already so high, it doesn't matter, but we want to employ more people considering unemployment is at all-time high during COVID. And so like if you're able to increase even one job within the affirmative world, you probably should be buying it. And then they tell you on the offers, they just say like it seems like people are going to be sucking up your money, but already we can see like it's just going to be one individual. It's not as massive an impact as they tell you here. And so ultimately, because of that, you should be voting for the affirmative.
Okay, so I'm Katie Doran, the second speaker for the opposition team. This speech is just going to be an overview, which you can flow on the framing sheet because that's the first paper I'll be talking about very briefly. And then I'll be talking about our disadvantages. I'm actually going to talk about our second disadvantage about working hard first, and then I'll talk about innovation, then case and order. So overview / framing, then working hard, then innovation, and then case and order. All right. My time begins now. The affirmation creates a world in which this theoretical you becomes entirely disconnected to charity and loses all motivation to actually put effort into their work. Sure, all of their discretionary income might be going towards charity, but that discretionary income is only going to decrease in a world in which they're unable or unwilling to work hard because they simply don't see any benefit in it. First, let's break down some of the framing arguments. Essentially, they make the argument that the resolution is a singular, one person, a singular you. All right, let's accept that this resolution is a singular you just for the purposes of today's debate. However, I would like to make the observation that you simply means a neutral or third person, and that it ought to be an average college graduate from a prestigious US university. That means that both affirmation and the negative team should not assume that this person is any more or less altruistic than the average graduate from a prestigious US university. Doing so would be unfair based on the team that makes those assumptions. So basically, this neutral third person has to be your average student. They have an average level of altruism, an average level of intellect, and an average level of profit motive. So let's take the most likely scenario, this average scenario, and talk about why that's actually going to be so bad. And that brings us to our second contention, where we talk about working hard. Essentially, our contention here is that 74.4% of millennials, which are the people graduating from college right now, and thus the people that you must be referring to, value profit as a essential life goal. Now, how many millennials actually value charity as an essential life goal? That was not even included in the article for the sole reason that it is not a main motivation for most of them as for why they seek high-paying jobs or as for why they work hard. This means that if we are to consider the average millennial graduate of a prestigious US university, chances are their life goal, their essential life goals revolve around making money. In a world in which they make no money because all of their discretionary income that they would be spending on luxuries instead go entirely to charity, they would lose the motivation to work hard. In losing the motivation to work hard, they probably won't be getting promotions. If anything, they'll be demoted, or they'll lose their job, or they quite simply won't put as much work or effort into their job, which harms their business and the economy overall. Now, my opponents say, well, there still will be a motivation because you can buy a car / a BMW because these are quote unquote small luxuries. Okay, yeah, you can buy a car, but you can't buy a good car. You probably have to buy a secondhand car or a used car. It's the equivalent of you can buy dinner, but you can't go to Whole Foods to buy dinner. You can buy like the necessities so that you can make yourself a salad, but you probably can't buy yourself dessert because that's a luxury. Essentially, they take away all the luxuries that people value and the reason why people value money in the first place. Yes, you are still able to survive. Yes, you have the necessities, but you don't have the chance to take breaks or to go on vacations, for example. Now, they try to say that it'll bring people joy to donate to a charity. They have no empirics to back this up. The average person is probably not so incredibly altruistic that it brings them more joy to donate to a charity than it does for them to like be able to make some level of profit, for them to be able to take a one-day break, or for them to be able to buy themselves dessert even. Again, I'll also remind you that we as the negation team do not stand opposed to spending on charities. If anything, we support you spending a lot of your discretionary income, maybe 70 or 80% of your discretionary income on charity. That is something that we as the negation team absolutely support. But it should not be so much that you lose all incentive to create money in the first place because you aren't experiencing the benefits of money. The average millennial graduate of a prestigious US university values their money, and we need to allow them to keep some of that motivation, or else they're simply not going to put effort into their job. And if anything, they're no longer going to have so much money to invest into charity in the first place because they're getting demoted, or they're not working hard, or their business is collapsing. Okay, now let's talk about our first disadvantage, where we talk about innovation. Essentially, the argument here is that they remove all incentive for innovation because workers who are researching or innovating take decades to make good money, and that will not be as high as the best offer that they're receiving straight out of college. Now, essentially, they make the argument that like if you can pay for starting a business, then you probably have money and you wouldn't have more higher paying job offers. That really doesn't make sense. You're just as likely to have a high paying job offer if you're an innovative person. And if anything, you're probably more likely because innovative people probably have better grades and better extracurriculars and are generally better college students simply because they have that mindset. If anything, they probably do have offers from higher paying jobs, but we're simply saying that not in every instance should that person necessarily choose the higher paying jobs, because sometimes it's going to be better to turn towards innovation. Now, they try to say that you can have income from parents who are supporting you that you can use for starting a business. I don't really know why this is relevant to today's round. Income from your parents is still money. It's still income. And in their world, that's still money that you would be forced to spend on charity because it is not essential. It is not a necessity that you are able to start your business. Thus, they would not support a world in which people spent this money on ever starting a business. And also, if you're already working a full-time job at like Goldman Sachs, like they talk about, you probably don't have as much time for starting a successful business. Now, we talk about the example of China, and my opponents try to make the argument that China fell behind because of mass production and communism. That's why there's no innovation. Yeah, that's exactly our argument. In places like China's government, in which they have a somewhat communist system, or basically a system in which workers don't benefit off of their own merits, or that workers don't benefit off of their own fruits of their labors, their economy stagnates. They have less innovation. They have lower economies and lower GDPs per capita. That's because workers simply don't have motivation. If I'm putting all my time and money, investing all my time and money into working hard, but I don't get to see the rewards of that, and all of those rewards go to someone else, I'm going to lose the motivation to continue to do that. Now, we talk about Pfizer and Moderna, and they try to make the argument that these are big companies and would offer really high salaries. Sure, at the status quo, Pfizer and Moderna might be really big companies, but to begin with, the workers who are researching vaccines at step one, when we're still at step one, they're going to take decades to make good money. And my opponents would essentially create a world in which people are discouraged from ever innovating or ever taking that first step because there's already a bigger corporation, such as Google or Goldman Sachs, that's offering them that ability. Okay, let's go into their contentions about charity primarily. All right, before we get into the specific arguments, I would again like to point out specifically that we as the negation, again, absolutely support spending 70 to 80% of your income on charities. Thus, we can probably get 70 to 80% of the benefits that my opponents talk about when it comes to charities. However, we also avoid the offense that we as the negation team have brought up, that you will lose the incentive to work hard. If anything, spending 70 to 80% of your money on charity counterintuitively actually is better for the charities because you are more likely to stay motivated in your job. You're more likely to keep your job, and you're more likely to keep a high paying job. That means that 70 to 80% of your income is going to be better for those charities than a worker who spends 100% of their discretionary income there, but loses that discretionary income really quickly because the company sees that they aren't motivated. All right, Specifically, they make the argument that these people will research where to spend money and that they'll find good charities to donate to. Sure, but it's not necessarily that easy to find which charity is a good charity to donate to. Obviously, all charities are going to have mission statements that sound really good and sound like they're doing really good things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that most of their funding doesn't go towards administration or fundraising and not necessarily towards actually helping people. This just goes to show that the benefit of charities may not be as massive as they talk about and shouldn't be weighed so heavily, especially when we have contention such as worker satisfaction or the production of innovation, which tends to come from graduates of prestigious US universities who are building off of the research that they already did during university. You can also extend our argument about how $1 invested in research and development typically leads to a $15 dividend. That $15 dividend is something that this person could now spend on charities. They could spend $10 or $12 of that on charities. In contrast, the affirmation creates a world in which that person only has $1 instead of $15 because they never invested it in research and development. Essentially, this is a turn on their contention. If you don't work hard or if you don't have incentive to innovate, chances are your balance overall, the amount of money you make overall, is going to decrease. Even if you spend all of that discretionary money, on charities, most of that is not going to be incredibly beneficial, especially if you're losing motivation in your job and your discretionary income itself is decreasing. At the end of the day, we support charities and we want people to spend money on charities, but it's critical that they stay motivated so that they're actually able to keep up the amount of discretionary income that they have to begin with.
Okay, this speech is going to be an overview of the entire round, two-world comparison, and boners. So you can fill this on a separate sheet of paper. Let's first look at what the implications of the affirmative plan has on us, or this individual who we say is this neutral third-party actor, or the average graduate from a college, from a university. We see already, as Katie tells you and I already tell you, is that 74.4% of millennials are motivated by money. This is the average college student. But also, if you want empirics, you can just, like they say, you can apply this to yourself. Most likely, a lot of us would choose, the reason that we would choose more high-paying jobs is not because they're more beneficial for society, but because they make more money, so we can spend it on goods that are not a part of our discretionary income. That's just how the average person thinks, and it's a very reasonable way to think that. And this survey didn't even include charity because that's so irrelevant to a lot of people's mindset and reason for choosing their for having a job in the first place. So that means that when you do have to donate all of your discretionary income to charity, discretionary income to charity, you're going to be making virtually no money because you're going to be unmotivated to make money. If you're just working even more hours and you're spending your entire day 9 to 5 doing all this labor, and then you realize if you did half the work, you would still get the same income, there's no reason for these people to work hard. Meaning, at best, they might be generating $100 or $200 for charity, but it's really not going to make a difference considering all the administrative costs I list in my first speech. But that also means that either they get laid off from their job or they quit their job because they realize that there's no use of following this policy, this moral policy that the app lays out. Meaning, again, there's very, very little impact to charity if they even donate anything to charity in the first place. They say there's going to be discretionary income. Sure, the car wasn't the best example, but as Katie says, you can't take breaks. They don't let them argue that going to Hawaii on a vacation and buying a yacht is discretionary income necessary for happiness, because then that's a huge egregious breach of the definitions. But a lot of things that people live for are not discretionary income, meaning if they have no innovation, there's going to be no charity money generated. However, in our world, we support spending a lot of your income. We'd argue you should be a good person. You can donate 70 to 80% of your discretionary income and you can still stay motivated. This is even better for charity because charity is going to have a better meaning to people. It's not going to be somewhere they throw money in so that people they don't see gets their money, but rather it's a choice that they make to be good humans. If something is a requirement, humans are less likely to want to follow through, which is just going to discourage charity in the future for that person or discourage them from working entirely. Okay, so that leads us to our contentions. The most important contention you need to extend is contention 2, which is work ethic. We tell you, and they can see this, examples in which there are communist countries, the average GDP, the average, work output of a person is far lower than America. And in general, we're looking at the average person. Don't let them get away with, oh, Ivy League people are just like better people. Like that's completely logical fallacy. But what that means is if we're looking at the average person in general, especially the average millennial, they're not going to be working hard. This defeats their entire case. You can extend this as an answer. So, but also on innovation, as Katie tells you, there's huge benefits and your money actually like doubles, triples because of innovation, R&D, and this helps people even more. If you can develop a technology that can, go to millions of people, especially in developing countries, that's going to be far more effective than making people dependent on your charity, which is going to be very insufficient in the broad image. Yeah. So they're going to be stopping innovation, stopping research, because again, research in its primary stages is very ineffective. We need these people straight out of university to go into research because universities is where a lot of these techniques are fostered. But on their contention, even if you buy that we're going to be spending money on charity, I already tell you, and Katie reiterates this, that like almost half it goes to administrative costs. It doesn't mean they're going to like all this money is going to go to good charities, blah, blah, blah. Basically, charity is just money. It's just a Band-Aid on the problem. Innovation is how we can get people out of poverty. And innovation is how in developing countries too, is how we can improve people's quality of life in general, rather than forcing people to spend all their money from this very high paying job that they otherwise would have money to spend on a trip to Alaska or anything like that on charity. That's going to create a terrible work ethic for people and also a terrible outlook of charity. So for these reasons, you must vote neg.
Okay. So my speech is just going to be, I guess, yeah, okay. So my speech is going to be framing at the top and then going through several points of clash and sort of extrapolating from there. I'd prefer if it was float on a new sheet, if possible.
Yeah, I always float rebuttals on these speech or new sheets. You're good.
Okay, awesome. Is anyone not ready? Then my time begins now. So at the top, both of my opponents concede to the framing that we've given that you is a third person. We're going to be going with that framing on the affirmation. We're going to be explaining how the average Ivy League graduate, it would be beneficial for society, for that person, for that singular person to move into this role. But it's important to clear up that the negative is advocating for the status quo. They provide no counter advocacy, nor do they provide a counter plan of any kind. And this is a fact round in the first place. So they can't just be like, oh, they're going to be advocating for 70% of like all money to be spent towards charity. That's just simply not something that's within their like burden. They don't bring this up in the first speech either as like an advocacy they're doing.
Okay, sorry. Katie couldn't call us POO because her Wi-Fi is cutting out. But the argument that we don't have a counter advocacy and that this is a fact round is completely new. And the argument that we're advocating for the status quo, that should have came out of your first or second speech, but we don't have a chance to respond to it now.
So the first time the argumentation is made that like their side equals spending 70% of discretionary money, not that just that they support discretionary money spent on charity, but that their side equals that impact, was made during the block, which means this is the only time I can respond to that sort of like way of framing it, because in the previous speeches, they just said that like they like charity, but not that they're actually going to be spending 70 to 80% of their money on charity.
Well, in the first line of my speech, I said we advocate that you should still spend 70 to 80% of your discretionary income. So you definitely could have brought that up in your MG. And we would have and we would have been able
it's not a back and forth. It's one person speaks, the other person speaks. So we'll decide on it.
All right, then I'm going to resume my time now. Okay, so then let's go into like what the average Ivy League graduate means. First of all, we're talking about discretionary money. In quotes, what we said as a definition is expenditure on necessary items. This is when like you spend money on like, this is what, so you can't really say that like dessert is not a discretionary item. Fundamentally, food, housing, and transportation is not going to be something that's outside of a discretionary item. That's the argument Caroline makes, that like talking about buying a better house or a better car, that still falls under discretionary spending, economically speaking. We're talking about it in an economic sense. What classifies as discretionary? Buying shelter, buying cars and transportation, and buying food and water is discretionary spending. That is the basic necessities of someone to live. Now, buying a yacht, that's completely different. And I'd argue that buying a yacht, if that's not going to be the average Ivy League student's reason to make money in the first place. Like, nobody is going out of the Ivy League thinking, oh, I'm going to buy a yacht and that is my only reason to work. And if I can't buy a yacht, I'm not going to work my job. That's simply not an expectable like thing that you could come from an average Ivy League graduate. And so this one person in the resolution is likely going to want like a house, food, transportation, and that's all going to be covered by discretionary. My opponents have brought up this millennial statistic several times, but like the fundamental matter is that like the only reason why these millennials are saying that money is like the most important thing to them is because they don't have their basic necessities met in the first place. We are meeting.
This 74.4% statistic also came out in my first speech. If you want to explain what the statistic means to you or millennials or why the statistic is there, you should have, again, brought that up in your MG.
So Caroline tells you that like we'd be providing for the basic necessities of people's living plus like any extra luxuries they want to spend on these classifications of what's discretionary. So I think it's pretty like self-explanatory to cross apply that onto your statistic there. It's just a cross application. And like she talks about the BMW and stuff as well. Okay, resuming my time now. So we can see like because they'd be able to afford like these basic luxuries and these like necessities as well as like some higher level luxuries, it's pretty obvious that like millennials aren't going to be like, oh, I need money more than anything else, because they're going to have that money in the first place. Additionally, we can say like millennials are generally pretty idealistic, which means like giving to charity is definitely a purpose that could give them on top of like their basic necessities already given. Caroline gives you the analysis that like a lot of people, especially at these Ivy League schools, are driven to actually have a purpose in life beyond just money. And as a result, they're going to want to donate to charity, and seeing that their money is actually going to help people, like it's actually creating these nets and it's actually stopping children from dying, it's going to incentivize them even further because of the fact that their basic necessities and these higher level luxuries are completely covered. Additionally, we can see like the average person is going to be smart enough to Google like best charities online and find the link that we talk about with like, these are the qualifications of a best charity. Like that was the first link that goes when you search up something like this. It's pretty obvious that like both sides agree that an Ivy League student would have access to the internet and would have access to being able to Google that term. Is like an average person, if you're going to be donating $50,000 like a year for the rest of your life to charity, you're going to want to like be able to Google this in the first place. So that's a pretty like easy thing to say about an average Ivy League graduate. Fundamentally, there's also like they also talk about communist countries being like an example of how innovation is going to go down. But Caroline gives you the analysis that innovation is down within these communist countries, not because of like anything about giving to charity, but because those jobs simply don't exist in the first place, which is why they have those problems. In the United States, those jobs exist. And if someone is like getting a biology degree, they might go into like pharmaceuticals as the highest paying job in their degree, because that's what the ones they're going to interview for. Additionally, if somebody is so passionate about starting a business, they're going to be starting their business. They're not applying to jobs, and therefore they're not going to get job offers. Fundamentally, this like basically removes all of their innovation argumentation, because if someone is creating their own job, they're not applying for these finance positions in the first place. If someone is trying to be a doctor, they're applying for med school. They're not applying for like positions at Goldman Sachs. So ultimately, we can say they're going to be giving like they're going to be taking the highest paying jobs that are offered to them after like the interviews they have to do from like what they're interested in. So like all this communist country stuff basically becomes a wash. So ultimately what you have on the affirmation side is you have the average Ivy League graduate who's going to like have the like they're going to be making money, and they're going to be using that money a little bit on themselves for like these luxuries, the discretionary spending. You know, they're going to buy their nice car, they're going to have that incentive, but additionally they're going to be like, you know, working at this job, and they're most likely going to be making a huge amount of money, because that's what Ivy League graduates end up having. This amount of money is going to go towards charities that benefit the world as it is. We give you specific examples of how charities right now in the status quo are solving for things like COVID-19 relief. We give you specific examples of how like they're being able to decrease the amount of heart disease, how they're decreasing the amount of malaria and children dying as a result of that. This is a much larger net benefit than this one person can do anyways. And there's simply no response to the fact that if you go with the negative world, this person is simply not going to take the highest paying job, and this person, like someone else, is going to take that high paying job and not donate to charity in the first place. That is another like independent reason why you can vote for the affirmation. If you go with them, there's going to be zero donations at all, which is better than which is worse than just having $1. Even if you can only buy, the affirmation is going to have $1 of donation. That's still going to be more than anything that the negative can provide. For these reasons, I urge an affirmation ballot. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like both ballots are in. See, I'll go first, just because why not? It was a split decision, one for the auth, one for the gov. I voted AF, and I was reluctant to vote AF, but I voted AF on framing. I think that both teams needed to do way more work on framing. It was like top of case with like a minute or less in all of your speeches, and I think it should have been pretty much all of both of the second speeches should have been framing, because I think this debate comes 100% down to framing. If I buy the negs argument that this resolution applies to everyone, then all of their links make sense, they get access to all of their impacts, and AF is just screwed. If I buy AF's argument that it's just one person, then negs arguments don't really make sense, and AF like wins on this probability argument that that they donate some amount of money to charity, and neg donates no money to charity. So I think everybody needed to do way more work on framing. But that being said, I actually think neg is correct in their framing of the resolution, but I think that you just gave it up. So this is the difference between a fact and a policy round, right? If this was a policy round, AF would have been correct, because AF would be enacting a policy that says this one specific actor is doing this one specific action. But this wasn't a policy round, right? It was a fact round. And the fact was that you should donate your money to charity, right? Whatever the resolution was. And if we vote AF and we accept that fact, then it logically follows that everybody should do that thing. Because if that fact is true, then I, as an individual, am looking at that argument and I'm thinking, oh, this fact is true, as we just decided in the debate, therefore I should do this thing. So the resolution is just talking about one person, but if we accept the resolution as true, then it has to logically follow that everybody should do this thing. Yeah, so I think that neg shouldn't have given it up. You should have made that argument, and if you did make that argument, I would have voted neg for sure. That being said, I think the PMR was very lackluster, and I almost voted neg just because I didn't see the arguments that I wanted out of the PMR. I think that the only reason I didn't vote neg was because of the last sentence of the PMR, in which you talk about the probability argument. I think that probability argument should have been pretty much the entirety of your PMR. That and framing, obviously, but I think that the probability argument, the basically, and the whole last point, the whole like last affirmation point about others will take the job, basically went completely uncontested. Like I have no, this is the entirety of my last aff point. I have no red ink on this point. And not that that's a bad thing, because again, if you're talking about everybody, then it doesn't matter. But yeah, so I think AF wins on the probability argument that you're donating some money to charity and AF isn't donating any money to charity. Oh, neg ran into this kind of weird, you made a link and an impact turn. You said that donating to charity can be bad, but then you're also saying that they're actually donating less money to charity because they're demotivating the person, and they'll in the future donate less money. But then you're also saying that donating some money to charity is bad. So watch out for the link and impact turns. Never want to do both. Got to pick one of them. I think that's most of what I had. Yeah. Oh, I buy the thing that like neg can't really argue that, like, even if you say that you want like 70 to 80% of the money to be donated to charity, I don't think that matters. If this was a policy round and you were running a CP, then obviously that would make sense. And this is, again, where AF was kind of arguing for a policy, because they were arguing for one specific actor to do one specific action, which was a policy. And in that case, neg would have been right to give a CP, but it like wasn't framed as a policy round, so it was just weird. Yeah, it was a weird round, but yeah, that's my reasoning.
So I voted off today. I thought that in the last two speeches, both sides agreed that we were talking from about an average person graduating from an elite university. So I do think that, in my view, we were talking about a rule to follow for the general person. and the average person, perhaps it's the wrong way to view it, but I thought we had come to agreement for there. But I think that was disastrous for Gov today, because the 100% standard of discretionary spending is too high a standard. And although I understand you talked about luxury cars and whatever, like perhaps it just comes, perhaps like negative gets or opposition gets access to just my understanding of what it is to be an adult working 60 to 70 hours a week, never taking a vacation ever. It is just too high of a standard, and I didn't see enough of a response. I don't care if you're driving a Mercedes Benz, that standard is just too high. And then I bought into the opposition motivation argument. And I think that even if you're the nicest person who's ever lived, if you are not reaping the benefits of your labor, you'll probably will do the bare minimum. And I do think that we'll run into productivity problems. And I found that both sides were not overly interested in communicating very clearly in the debate. Lots of speed, lots of arguments that were repeated in short clipped sentences. So perhaps I missed something, but I don't have a lot of my flow from Gov talking about like the work ethic problem in countries like China, where individuals maybe reap less. I was hoping that opposition, they didn't do it, but I was hoping they would extend the startup crisis, where like if the most elite people join corporations instead of startups, you know, we'll have like this lack of startups and we'll live in this like corporate dystopia where everyone works for Amazon. But like that didn't really come to fruition, but I probably would have voted on that anyway. Anyway, I'm a more traditional judge, so perhaps that played into this as well. So good job, guys. It was actually fun to watch, even though it was kind of a more tech debate than I'm comfortable with.
Let me just say one thing about the average person, because yeah, and both ballots came down to the framing of the debate. So clearly, both teams should have done more work on framing. So my understanding of how I took the average person is I in my brain I was thinking that the AF was basically taking an average person and then making that average person donate all of their money, rather than that like average person standard of affecting everybody. But like then again, that wasn't clear. So like it's that's where both teams needed to do more work on framing, because like one judge took it one way and one judge took it another way, and it was totally unclear. I could have gone exactly the way that the other judge went.
So
yeah.
I think that a way, this is actually just because I agree actually with what you just said, that I think we obviously took it different ways. I think that the word you, the opposition should have talked about it used colloquially to mean a plural second person, almost like the royal we, when a single person does something like that. Like it's the use of a term as gender neutral that kind of applies to everyone, because they would have said a college graduate if they meant a singular third person. And then you could have made an argument like linguistic determinism, like the word choice, the diction you matters when there were alternatives. And since they like, anyway, I think that would have been a strong opposition argument that might have, I'm not saying that is necessarily what you means. I just think that would have been something you could have said in your last speech that would have made it more clear.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good luck.
Yep, thanks. It was a good debate.